Megs Marvelous Egg, authored and illustrated by Ashby, narrated by Jonathan Mann, and music by Greg Paxton. It all began on the dullest of days when there was absolutely nothing to do. The air was humid and smelled like pickles, Meg thought, and the days wore on like the monotonous tick-tock of an old clock and was as fun as a balloon with a hole. Even her chewing gum had no taste. Boredom was everywhere like a big invisible blob, gobbling up all the fun. Meg squirmed. She wriggled in her chair. "Be still," said Mama. "Drink your chamomile tea." "Don't forget to eat your oatmeal," said Papa. "It's good for you." But Meg groaned. "I'm bored," she said. "There's nothing to do," she said louder with some effort. But Meg was ignored. Mama and Papa were talking about taxes. Perhaps they heard nothing at all. Then, through the window, she saw something bright streak across the sky. "I must make a wish," thought Meg. And so secretly, she made a big wish. Then just as she had made it, she was sent off to bed. When she got there, she pulled up her covers till they were snugly and just so. Then she slipped off to sleep without turning off the light. Suddenly, she awoke. "Fweep! Fweep!" came a sound from above, as something came down from outer space, a magnificent something with rockets ablaze. It came down from the night sky and spat fire and sparks. Over Meg's farm, it floated and hovered. Then it suddenly dropped into the chicken coop with a loud crackling boom. Bits of straw and chicken feathers flew in the air. The ground shook up and down. The crash bounced Meg's bed up into the air, and Meg found herself flying like a pancake that went up with a flip and then a flop, softly back on her bed. She gave out a yelp. "What's that sound?" It came from outside. It came from the chicken coop. She then dressed quickly and ran down the stairs as fast as she could. She ran to the chicken coop and slowly opened its heavy doors. Chicken feathers were strewn all about. In the dim light that came from the coop, Meg saw before her a big, round, mysterious thing. Cautiously, she went closer in order to see. It had large polka dots and was entirely green. Then, to her astonishment, she realized it was an egg, an incredibly enormous, giant green egg. The egg began to shiver and then began to wobble. Then from inside the egg came a deep, rumbling laugh and a voice that said, "Doodly-doo, how do you do?" Meg jumped up in the air, almost out of her shoes. "Yikes! Something's inside," she cried with a start. She ran in circles, waving her hands, till finally Meg calmed down. She then crept forward, close to the egg. Meekly, she said, "Hello? Hello in there. Do you need to come out?" The egg stopped wobbling and said, "Doodly-dee, I'd like to be set free." Then the egg laughed again with a big jolly laugh, so the egg quivered and shivered like big jolly green jello. Meg needed to think quickly. She needed a plan. She fetched her little wagon, then with a wiggle to and fro, she wobbled the egg into the wagon and pulled it across the barnyard. She pulled the egg into the house, and so as not to disturb anyone, she was as quiet as she could be. Though Meg was little, she was quite strong. She was a farm girl, after all. She pushed the egg upstairs into her room. All the while, the egg chuckled. It didn't seem to mind being moved up at all. She heaved the egg into her bed, then carefully, quietly, pulled the covers over the top of the egg. Meg thought, "If it's warm, maybe it will hatch. Then it made me hungry. I must bake cookies or cake or even a pie. But then, from the door, Mama gave out a scream. She had her hands to her head. "What is that thing?" cried Mama. "It's got spots and it's green." Just then, Papa jumped into the room with great delight on his face and a voice of glee. "Amazing! Stupendous! A giant green egg? Where did it come from?" said Papa. Meg replied, "I found it in the chicken coop. I'm trying to hatch it, and I know what it is, and it wants to be set free." Papa danced with excitement with a ridiculous jig, for he had his own idea in his head. "We will be famous and lucky. Just think what we'll win," said Papa, dancing with Mama. They had not noticed that Meg had a plan to hatch it. Clearly, they did not understand. The next day, the news went throughout the town that Mama and Papa had found something amazing on their own farm. Neighbors and newsmen came to see just what was this egg. Was it really that big? Mama and Papa, the egg, and Meg too, posed for all the photographers. The people listened to Papa for the story of the egg, and Papa spun his yarn. Meg was not allowed to cut in. But then the great egg began to laugh its jolly laugh. The crowd was startled and then began to laugh as well. They began to wonder if this story was true. That night in the living room, Mama made cocoa, Meg watched TV, and Papa read the newspaper. The great egg was in all the news, while the egg rocked in the old rocking chair, chuckling away. Then came the announcement that a professor who said he was the wisest of wise said that he would announce what was in the egg at the town hall. "But I'm the one who knows," Meg said out loud. "Hush now, it's time for bed," said Mama. The next day, a parade lined up to transport the egg. There was a marching band with drums, tubas, and flutes. Crowds cheered and waved, with egg balloons too. There were floats of all kinds, even one for the egg. Meg found herself perched on it with her family and the egg too. Mama, Papa, and Meg waved from their own egg float, rolled on by the cheering crowds on the sides of Main Street. "This is fun," Meg thought out loud as they rode by the crowds. The egg laughed its big jolly laugh, and Meg laughed too. There were whoops and cheers and gasps of awe as the great egg was carried in and brought to the stage. It was placed on a high table. Mama, Papa, and Meg too bowed to the crowd. Then a procession of wise women and wise men in various odd hats came up to examine the egg. They each looked at it closely, then turned to the audience. They exclaimed what they each thought it was while putting on airs, so they each would sound incredibly profound. The scientists theorized that it was a dinosaur from the primordial ooze, while the philosopher posed that it was an ingenious egg thinking deep thoughts. The secret agent claimed it was part of a plot. The wizard said it was a magical talisman from ancient times. And an inventor speculated that it was a music box making its own tunes. Then, the professor came in with a large scroll in his hands. The crowds parted aside. Everything became quiet. Not a pin, not a yelp could be heard in the hall, except for a chuckle of the egg up on its table. The professor held up the scroll, and he began to explain. "Ladies and gentlemen, this egg we have here is described on this chart so all can see what it is for a fact, and so you will believe." Then with a big flourish, the professor raised the scroll over his head to unfurl its contents. But then, to everyone's dread, as he reached the scroll up into the air, the scroll bumped into the egg, and everyone screamed. The egg began to wiggle. The egg began to wobble. Then with a tip and a topple, it fell off the table. Down the stairs it bounced, with Papa, the professor, and Meg running as well. "Come back, my dear egg," the professor cried. But the egg kept on bouncing down the stairs, much to the horror of the crowds in the hall. Meg was sure that the egg would meet its own doom. "I must protect the egg," Meg thought to herself. And then with courage, she stepped out between the crowd and the egg with tiny clenched fists. Then out loud she said, "Stand back! Don't you see? It will hatch if you just let it be." It came down here from outer space. It landed in the chicken coop, so it can only be one thing: a giant space chicken. Just you wait and see. Finally, the egg wobbled to a stop. A crack appeared on the mighty egg shell. Papa and the professor looked, and so did Meg. The egg popped open, and what did they see? Before them was a large space chicken laughing, "Cock-a-doodle-doo!" Papa was startled, the professor was stunned. But Meg, she was happy because her friend was now free. Meg cried out, "Let's have some fun. Let's laugh the egg laugh." And so the marching band played and the people laughed along. Meg and the space chicken danced throughout the night. If you don't believe this story is totally true, just say the space chicken laugh and dance the space chicken dance. And you just might believe it if you give it a chance.